thank you all for helping us with this edition. Just as a side note, at the end of the day, which is going to be at 3:15 p.m., we're going to have a raffle, and there are some prizes from upon top selection, which are going to happen. We're going to probably share this live as well. 2 drive tests, a few history books, and some accessories are going to be drawn out at the end of the session, the closing of the session. A few things, a few words about the tool that you're in right now, which is called Floor, the conference tool. There's a lobby where there can happen, public conversation where everybody can attend. It's like a break in between sessions. You can go into the lobby. There's the lounge. This is a concept which is a bit different, where there are smaller tables. You can have private conversations up to 4 people. And then there's the booth, which is virtual stand of each and every partner. It's like a one-to-one video call where you want to ask much more detailed information. And of course, there's each and every session that you have to join into. And there you can see the actual presentations that are being delivered at every given time. After 11, by the way, we're going to have 2 tracks, orange and purple. More details about that in a few minutes. But for now, until 10:45 or so, we're just going to have this session, which is the opening remarks and the keynote. There are some lounge tables you're going to find on the platform. This is the spread. The table number 1, for example, is Aleph. Table number 2 is Argo, and so on and so forth. All the other partners. You can find them there if you have specific questions about their products, about their presentation, if you just want to talk to them. So please go ahead and use this facility as well. This is the agenda, as I mentioned before. Up to just before 11, we're going to have these keynote presentations. And then after 11, we have 2 tracks in parallel. So you're going to have to choose between the sessions that you prefer. Mostly are 30 minutes presentations up to after the lunch break, where we have 2 one-hour sessions each on each track, actually 4 one-hour sessions in total. And then at 3:15 p.m. or so, we're going to have to do the conference closing, which is basically the raffle and some details about the recordings, where you can find them, and so on and so forth. So this is the logistical part of the conversation of the conference. Just before we actually go on with the content, I want to set up, let's say, a context, because this whole edition is focused on the Microsoft Cloud in a very generic way. So all the other technologies around Azure, around Microsoft 365, so I would call them in general the Microsoft Cloud. And just wanted to bring you into a context of where do we stand with the Microsoft Cloud at this point, just as a setup, as a common denominator before we go into the details of the day. So, and this is actually my very personal opinion, that now we can see the Microsoft Cloud in 2 ways. On one hand, in the left-hand side of your screen, we see maturity, we see practices, we see recommendations, we see guidance, which all compound into maturity. There's experience, there are best ways to do stuff around the Microsoft Cloud. And on the right-hand side, I wanted to just point out some of the things which fall into the innovation category. So while it has matured and it continues to mature, especially in best practices, especially in how to do stuff with the Microsoft Cloud, it's also evolving at a very fast pace, which is, they deliver a lot of technology every month, every quarter, every day around the Power Platform, which we're going to have a session about a bit later on today, around artificial intelligence, and especially the SaaS, software as a service products, or the off-the-shelf products, which is Cognitive Service, which is another session my colleague Dan is going to have today later. There's Project Cortex, which comes on top of Microsoft 365. All of these, so Cognitive Services, Cortex, and so on, are what I would call democratizing AI. So which is basically making AI available for everyone. And of course, there's much more innovation into the hardcore stuff. In general, in artificial intelligence, in machine learning, where if you're a data scientist, if you're a programmer, if you're an engineer, you have a lot of tools, a lot of technology to work with. So there's a lot of innovation. But what I want to focus on the next 2 or 3 minutes, it's also the maturity which comes to play in the recent years around governance. By the way, this used to be and still is one of the major concerns of big companies when it comes to migrating to the Microsoft Cloud, to Azure. How do I govern my resources? How do I control my costs, etc., etc.? And then there's Cloud Adoption Framework, which is a set of guidances. It's a framework with best practices and how to do stuff, how to approach the migration to Microsoft Azure. Then there's well-architected framework, which is a set of principles on how to architect your workloads for Azure. Even if you have your existing workload and you want to migrate it to Azure, that's one case, or you design it from the get-go for Azure, there are a few recommendations, a few principles, which comes from architecture, software and infrastructure architecture, on how to, design those workloads. Then there's cloud native apps, which is an architectural set of recommendations which comes from Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which is an open source or an independent foundation with a lot of contribution in the open source world. And they have also the recommendations how to design an application for the cloud. I'll give you just a few examples to make it more clear. So when we want to migrate something from on-premises to the cloud, one of the very important ideas is to make sure we understand what are the motivations. Why do we want to migrate to the cloud? Because there are different ways to do that. On the left-hand side, you see a migration type which is called lift and shift. You basically take virtual machines and data and move it to the cloud, to Azure, usually using some tools like site migration or other Microsoft tools already built. But then on the right-hand side, you see modernization, which is, it's just a word which tries to say that sometimes it's better to redesign, to change how your application looks like, and then move it to the cloud. It's not going to be a one-to-one lift and shift migration. It's not going to be one VM from on-premises goes to one VM in Azure. It's going to be changed. You're going to use more platform as a service functionality. You're going to use much more cloud-specific or Azure-specific functionality. And the choice between these two major options is actually reflected into what you move. On the right-hand side, you move assets. You move VMs, you move data. On the left-hand side, you redesign maybe your workloads. It's just going to be, migrated into Azure, but it's not going to look like how it was on premises. And the motivation where we start from, why do we want to migrate into Azure? There are 3 major categories, and I try to highlight them in different colors to match the kind of migration that we do. So on the leftmost column, you see events like you have to renew your contract with the data center, or your IT hardware is expiring. It's old, you have to replace it. So events like that, which usually mean that you will go on the assets type and lift and shift migration. You simply want to replace your hardware, right? And then you look at what you have as IT assets, VMs and data. Going to the center and right-hand side, you see more business focused reasons like cost savings, optimization of your operations, automating your processes, scaling, access to new technology, new ways to do the same stuff. And when you have such reasons as the main reason to move to Azure, then you don't look at what you have as just a bunch of virtual machines and data. You look at workloads which have business value. You look like, okay, this is the HR application, or this is the ERP. I don't care how it looks like on premises. It has 5 VMs and some data and some files. I just want it to Azure, moved to Azure. I wanted to have these criteria of success, which could be KPIs around availability, around scalability, around performance. I want these business criteria met. I don't care how it runs in Azure. It could be in infrastructure as a service, it could be in platform as a service. So when you have business reasons like the ones in the rightmost columns, you're going to do a very different migration, where you will also consider, for example, redesigning, re-architecting your workloads. And that's one of the most important fundamental things you need to analyze before going into the cloud. Okay, this is just one example. Another very specific example, this also comes from Cloud Adoption Framework, one of the best practices around the cloud, is if you have an existing application, there are different ways, at least 3 ways to migrate it into the cloud. You simply redeploy it into Azure in virtual machines. It's like a lift and shift, or you adapt it for the cloud. You redesign it for containers, for example, or you redesign it for microservices using functions, using other serverless functionality from Microsoft Azure. So this is yet another example of how to move applications to the cloud coming from Cloud Adoption Framework. It's another example of maturity because we have a lot of best practices on how to do it depending on where we stand and what our business criteria, our motivations to move to Azure are. What we do in Avelgo, in our company, and this is actually the framework, the set of services that we have been offering for the last 2 or 3 years now, that we call Avelgo 365. And these services are actually matching the recommendations that Microsoft have in their best practices in Cloud Adoption Framework, which is, plan, design, assess what you have, understand the reasons, and based on those reasons, design the particular way to migrate to Azure, then optimize, then prepare to manage, to govern everything that you have there, and then innovate. Those are the 5 pillars in our set of services. It doesn't happen all the time that we go into a sequential mode. So in sequence, it could be very different ways to do that, depending on the situation where our customer is. But we're very well prepared to tackle on all of these phases. It could be, I just have a rough idea that I wanted to migrate to Azure and I might have some business reasons, and then we start from scratch. Or it could be, I already started doing Azure stuff. I already know Azure. I just want to optimize. I want to use more technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning. And that's what we do in this full umbrella we call Avelgo 365. A few examples of the things that we have done lately. For example, we helped Raiffeisen, we helped Microsoft actually migrate Raiffeisen from Google Cloud to Microsoft 365. It was a project which finished a few months ago. A lot of users, a lot of complexity around how to retrain users to the new technology, how to migrate a lot of data in a very narrow window of time. So that's what we did, and it was a successful project with, finishing on time, 0 data loss, and all of that, which is needed for compliance in the banking industry. That's just one example that we have done. A very different example comes from the Azure world, where we helped UiPath initially with their DevOps teams to actually gain control over their cloud footprint, which is what we call governance. We help them, organize their resources, organize who has access, what kinds of users can do what stuff in Azure. That's basically what we call governance. And then we extended that to a lot of other stuff, including machine learning, AI, a lot of work using the Microsoft Cloud for UiPath. Having said that, I'm preparing to switch to Violeta and Luca, which is already online and prepared to go next. I'm going to cut off, and she's going to come online in a few seconds. So thank you very much for your attention for now. Please enjoy the next sessions, the rest of the conference. Thank you, and I welcome Violeta.